Elton's Ledge, a rocky outcrop in southwest Virginia's Buchanan County, was once the site of a 1925 coal mine collapse that killed 20 men. No bodies were ever found. Locals believe their spirits still roam the ledge, as silent as the tomb. In winter 2023, after my brother overdosed, I felt numb, like a miner entombed. On a dare, I resolved to climb Elton's Ledge alone to see if those silent miners lingered. I reached the forested base of Elton's Ledge just after noon, snow crunching underfoot. At 2 p.m., I found the old entry shaft, a yawning hole in the rock, half blocked by rotted timbers. Peering in, I shone my flashlight into absolute darkness. The beam revealed aged pickaxes, dusty helmets, and boots frozen in coal dust, as if the miners had halted mid-shift. A sudden gust rattled the support beams. I shivered, recalling my brother's scribbled note, "Echoes get lost in stone." Driven by morbid fascination, I squeezed past broken timbers and pressed deeper into the collapsed passage. Under the weight of mounting snow outside, the tunnel began to narrow until I had to crouch. Ahead, half buried in coal waste, I saw fresh footprints, but small, leading uphill into solid rock. My heart hammered as I whispered, "Anyone here?" The footprints seemed to pulse under my lamp, then disappeared into the wall. A chill breath grazed my neck. When I spun, the beam landed on shovels leaning against the rock, though I was certain I'd left them at the shaft's entrance. Twilight approached as I clawed my way back into the open air, stepping onto a narrow ledge overlooking a valley choked in white. The scene was breathtaking, until I retrieved my camera and saw, behind me, 3 shadowy figures emerging from the tunnel's mouth. Tall men in coal soot faces, eyes vacant, lumbering forward in silence. I blinked and they vanished, but when I lowered my flashlight, I discovered a scrap of my brother's bandana on the ledge, its pattern unmistakable. Dusk's blue light faded into pitch darkness by 6 p.m. Determined to descend before night, I followed the faint trail off the ledge, but each time I glanced back, the silhouettes had reappeared further along the ridge, still following in eerie silence. At one point, I stumbled on uneven ground and fell against an outcrop that scraped my arm. When I righted myself, I found a miner's helmet at my feet. No coal dust, clean and shining under starlight. My breath caught. I remembered the ledger entry I'd seen in my brother's notebook. "Our ghosts push you down. Don't look back." Panic surging, I sprinted across the snow until I burst into the lumbering warmth of my truck. The headlights splashed onto the ledge. No figures, no footprints, only a single helmet perched on a rock. I sped away, jamming on the radio to drown out the pounding in my chest. Elton's Ledge is sealed now under a danger mine collapse sign. Yet sometimes, when the wind howls through my attic window, I swear I hear the sputter of coal dust and the shuffle of boots on rock. Whenever I think of my brother, I wonder if the silent miners, lost in darkness, found his soul and keep him company among their shadows. Hale Ridge Road in North Carolina's Swain County is a winding gravel path locals avoid after dusk. Legend says a woman in white hitchhikes there and anyone who stops vanishes. In summer 2024, after my divorce finalized, I drove home late from Asheville. Low on gas, I turned onto Hale Ridge, convinced it was the shortest route. As twilight fell, I realized I might have made a grave mistake. I crested a hill where dense holly and laurel squeezed the road into a dark corridor. At 8 p.m., I spotted a woman in a white dress leaning against a broken-down station wagon. Her face was hidden by midnight hair, and she held an old, lacy handkerchief. Heart pounding, I slowed and rolled my window down. "Need a ride?" I asked. Her dress fluttered in a non-existent breeze. She lifted her head slowly, revealing empty eye sockets that reflected my headlights. I slammed the door shut and gunned the engine, tires skidding over gravel as I fled. Moments later, I heard an engine revving behind me, too close. I glanced at my rear view, no headlights. Still, I felt that rush of wind and heard a snarling roar of brake failure. I floored the accelerator. The revving vanished, leaving only nervous silence. Glancing back again, I saw a decades-old Crown Victoria with no lights, its grille looming like a judge's bench. It mirrored my every movement, inching forward no matter how fast I sped. Panic spiked. I veered across the center line, praying no oncoming car appeared. I reached a covered bridge spanning Big Swain Creek. My tires screeched on the icy planks as I skidded to a halt in the center. The Crown Vic pulled up behind me, engine idling though no exhaust smoke emerged. In my side view mirror, I saw only a dark silhouette behind the wheel. I tried to reverse, but the bridge pitch tipped, and my wheels spun on slick wood. The woman stepped off the bridge into my headlights, her dress billowing. She reached out and touched my hood, skin cold, soaking wet. I yanked the wheel free, fishtailing, and barely made it off the bridge. By midnight, I crested a final hairpin turn and encountered a narrow overlook bathed in moonlight. My fuel gauge teetered on empty. The woman stood on the guardrail, her handkerchief stained red like dried blood. The countdown on my dash read 0 miles to E. I threw the car in drive and barreled off. As I sped away, I glimpsed the woman plunge off the overlook, crashing into shadows below. I didn't stop until I found a gas station in town. I never learned the woman's identity. Locals only whisper of a bride who froze driving Hale Ridge on her honeymoon in 1972. Now, whenever I drive any gravel road at dusk, I feel someone watching me from the mist. I still have that red handkerchief stained across my mind, proof that some specters refuse to stay buried on Hale Ridge Road. Clingman's Dome, the Smokies' highest peak, is notorious for bitter summit winds. In early 2024, after a severe panic attack left me trapped in my apartment, my therapist recommended nature therapy. Recalling my grandfather's stories of the gnarled man who haunted the dome in winter, I resolved to face my fear by hiking there at first light. I left the car at Newfound Gap just before dawn in February 2024. The air bit cold, and a shroud of mist coiled around the slope. By 8 a.m., climbing the wooden boardwalk, I found the tower deserted, its circular ramp crowned by frost. Each step was coated in black ice that snapped under my boots. I wrapped my coat tighter and pressed toward the observation deck. My grandfather's journal entry, "Beware the gnarled man who picks at your bones with frostbitten fingers," echoed in my mind. As I tipped over the final railing, I spotted a hunched figure at the dome's far edge. Tattered coat clung to a frame of gnarly wood-like limbs. A bier of icicles draped his chin. He tapped his gloved fingers on the floorboards, slow, deliberate, like a funeral drum. My breath caught. I blinked. In the next moment, the figure staggered backward into swirling frost, melting away like a mirage. Determined, I descended a side trail toward the Forney Ridge area, hoping solitude would calm me. By midday, I reached a twisted hemlock stump carved into a grotesque face, jaw hinged open, teeth jagged as stalagmites. Beneath it lay frozen scraps, scarves, gloves, and a battered 2023 field guide. My heart hammered as I noticed a wooden totem face nailed above the stump, etched to match the gnarled man's beard exactly. I traced a petrified handprint just above the carving. The moment my finger touched the wood, the stump shifted beneath me, spitting ice. I tumbled backward as the totem's grin seemed to widen. Late afternoon brought me back to Clingman's Dome's boardwalk under a gray sky. The cold rattled my teeth. I inhaled deeply, steeling myself to leave before dusk. But as I set foot on the boards, I heard tapping all around, rail posts drumming in synchronized rhythm. My headlamp flickered to reveal frostbitten gloves nailed to each post, fingerless, splayed like pale talons. Higher up, silhouettes perched on each stair landing, their coats tattered, nostrils weeping icicles. Their hollow eyes fixed on me, unmoving. I felt the boardwalk sway under their silent presence, their tapping coalescing into a hollow chord. My legs seized as I stumbled past them, each step scattering frostbitten gloves across the wood. They did not follow, but their unblinking gaze sent a shiver deeper than any cold. I reached my car at first light, the summit cloud rolling in to blank out the tower behind me. I gave away my winter gear in the parking lot, jacket, gloves, hat, so no one else would mistake the gnarled man's tools. Months later, every time wind rattles my windows, I feel colder than the local heroes who never climb above 6,000 feet. Sometimes I glimpse frost-etched scratches on my doorframe, as though someone tapped at my door with gloved fingertips, still waiting for me to answer. In my hometown of Pine Hills, West Virginia, children whispered of a bone church buried deep in the hollow, a place where an illicit graveyard had been desecrated in the 1920s, leaving skeletal remains arranged in a crude chapel. When my grandfather passed away early in 2024, he left behind an old pocket watch and a single faded photograph, his father standing before a crudely built stone arch strewn with bleached bones. Grief made me reckless, so one November night I hiked into Pine Hills Hollow, determined to find that cursed chapel. I followed a deer path through frozen ferns until the moon slipped behind a bank of clouds, plunging the forest into inky blackness. My flashlight's beam caught a low stone arch about 50 yards ahead, dripping moss and framed by cedar saplings. Beneath it lay a mound of bleached femurs and skulls, arranged like pews facing an altar of stacked pelvic bones. My heart clenched as I recognized the same arch from my grandfather's photograph. Kneeling, I traced a finger over the stones, and an unnatural chill rippled up my spine. As I studied the bones, a faint humming rose around me, like chanting wind through hollow ribs. I straightened and saw a figure draped in tattered white robes stepping from behind an ash-black oak, its face hiding beneath a skull mask, ribs faintly visible under torn cloth. It raised a bony hand in silent greeting, then motioned me closer to the altar. My pulse thundered, but dread fused my feet to the earth. When I finally took a single step forward, the chanting surged. 6 more robed shapes emerged from every direction, circling the arch, their feet kicking up bone dust. I stumbled back as the leader raised a bone-covered chalice and poured a handful of teeth onto the altar. The teeth rattled like rain against metal. The chant coalesced into a single word, join. My throat seized. The robed figures lifted their masked heads, vices of hollow eye sockets reflecting my flashlight. As they advanced, I fled into the undergrowth, branches snagging my jacket. Behind me, I heard snapping bones, almost as if the skeletal congregation marched on hollow wooden pews. I collapsed at the forest's edge, lungs burning. When I forced myself to peer back, the arch stood empty beneath murky moonlight. Only the bone altar remained, half buried by leaves. The chanting had faded, but my ears still rang, as though every fallen soldier of Pine Hills Hollow whispered their final sermon. I never revealed the chapel's location. On cold mornings, I wake with phantom rattles in my ears, the echo of that bone church's choir. My grandfather's pocket watch ticks on my nightstand, but every tick summons memories of that bone altar and the silent hymn that beckoned me forward. I burned the photograph, hoping to sever whatever bond my grandfather's ghost formed there. Yet I know that in Pine Hills Hollow, some specters guard their chapel for eternity, waiting to fill every pew with one more lost soul. Harriman's Bridge, a rusted railroad trestle spanning the Kanawha River in southern West Virginia, was abandoned after a 1931 train fire that took 20 lives. Locals swear that on moonless nights, red smoke still coils above the bridge and a phantom train roars along invisible rails. In January 2024, after losing my job, I decided to drive into Colberg and spend one night at the old bridge, hoping to debunk the legend. I parked on the gravel approach just past dusk. In the half-light, the fiery red beams of my brake lights shimmered against the steel girders coated in river mist. I tightened my coat and climbed onto the trestle, each step echoing through the hollow like a hollow drum. Two beams of moonlight revealed the river's surface, glassy and motionless. I settled beside a tie and waited. At midnight, a distant whistle cut through the still air, low and mournful. My headlamp caught a ribbon of scarlet smoke winding along the rail line as if riding an unseen train. The rattle of wheels grew louder, metal screeching against steel, yet I saw no locomotive. When I confronted the bridge's midpoint, my light revealed a ghostly headlight shimmering 50 yards ahead, bright red where it should have been white. My pulse slammed as I heard the pressurized hiss of steam and the roar of wheels, though the rails beneath me were cold and unmoving. Driven by dread, I stumbled toward the smoke source, passing twisted rails that ended abruptly in midair. The smoke thickened, curling around my legs like quivering fingers. I raised my lamp. Standing before me was the phantom engineer, uniform singed black, face half melted by flames. His iron-hot gaze met mine. With a swift jerk of his head, the red headlights swung level with my eyes. I staggered backward, and the train's screech rose to a spine-shattering pitch. In shock, I stumbled to the riverbank below, just as the whistle died. Turning back, the bridge was empty, each wooden tie coated in red ash, as if the train had swept through moments ago. My boots, soaked in river water, now carried flecks of rust-colored soot, like embers still smoldering. I scrambled back to the car without looking up. The miles back to town took forever, each milepost on the highway passing as though in slow motion. Weeks later, I still smell red smoke whenever a passing freight horn echoes across the valley. My boots lie abandoned in my closet, caked in rust and ash I can't scrub away. Some nights, I dream of standing on that bridge, watchful as the phantom engineer invites me to board his burning train. I've since learned that every January marks the anniversary of that deadly 1931 fire, and I can't escape the feeling that the red smoke still drifts down the river each year, carrying lost souls across memories of smoke and flame. Big Creek switchbacks are treacherous hairpin turns high above with County, Virginia. In 1942, a family driving home from White's Mill mysteriously vanished there on a winter's eve. Locals say they can still hear their howling lament on bitter nights. In February 2024, after a panic attack confined me to my house for months, I felt compelled to drive up those switchbacks alone, hoping to face whatever haunted my anxiety. I rolled into the gravel turnout at dusk, the ridgeline silhouette jagged against a crimson sunset. The air was frigid enough to freeze my breath mid-out, turning it into ghostly tendrils. I parked and ascended on foot, each switchback tucked between hemlocks bowed low by snow. By 6:45 p.m., I reached the crest, wind rattling off guardrails and rattling my bones. As full darkness settled, I heard a high-pitched howl long mournful, like a dog's cry pitched through a child's lungs. My heart clenched. I should have turned back then, but I wanted to prove my fear pointless. The second howl answered, as though echoes multiplied down the slopes. I tramped downhill along the guardrail, headlamps sweeping across roadside snowbanks slick with ice. Every turn brought more howls, some clipped and urgent, others drawn out and despairing. I raised my voice, "Stop," but my words dissolved in the night air. Ahead, I saw the faint shapes of three figures at the edge of the bank, a man, woman, and small boy, bundled in threadbare coats, faces frozen in an open-mouthed howl. Their eyes were hollow orbs reflecting my light. My breath hitched, and I took a half-step backward. They vanished, though the howling only grew louder. Panicked, I raced down to the final switchback, where a rotted wooden shack once served as a miner's shack in the 1930s. I squeezed through a broken door frame and hunkered in a corner, phone held aloft for warmth. The howling crescendoed into a chorus of desperate screams, as if 100 voices trapped under ice reached my hiding spot. I propped my back against the wall, teeth chattering as the floorboards groaned under invisible footsteps pacing above. Then the door slammed shut behind me. My flashlight flickered and died. Total darkness swallowed me. I fumbled along the wall until I found a narrow window. Through its broken pane, I saw the three figures on the bank, howling upward toward the switchbacks. Their mouths gaped wider as if pulling me out into the cold. The floor beneath me vibrated with their chant until the shack's roof groaned, threatening collapse. I lunged for the window's broken edge and shoved myself out into the waist-high snow. The howling rang in my ears as I sprinted to my car down the frozen switchback road, tires spinning at the turnout until I finally escaped the howling ridge. Every winter now, when wind howls through cracks in my windows, I brace for that family's wail echoing back at me. I sold my old truck, too many memories of frozen footsteps at my door. Yet sometimes, when I flash my porch light at a passing car, I half expect to see a frozen family in the back seat, mouths open in wordless sorrow. The howling of Big Creek switchbacks haunts me still, an unbroken lament for those lost to the night. Lost Woman's Lake in eastern Pennsylvania was named for a woman who drowned there in 1878 searching for her missing child. Since then, locals say her ghost prowls the shoreline, calling out in desperate tones. In March 2024, I felt the stirrings of postpartum depression and decided a solo camping trip by that lake might clear my head. I pitched my tent close to the water's edge, determined to face whatever haunted that shore. I set up camp just after sundown, the surface of Lost Woman's Lake glassy, reflecting a sliver of moon. Summer's chill still clung. I wrapped myself in a thick wool blanket. Around 11 p.m., I heard a faint sobbing on the far shore, so though I thought it might be the wind. I hoisted my flashlight and aimed across the water. A woman's pale silhouette stood waist-deep, drenched and head bowed. My heartbeat spiked. I switched on my camp lantern. The figure vanished, though her sobbing lingered soft, tremulous, as though breath were caught between her teeth. Drawn by dread, I slipped into my boots and waded along a narrow spit into the lake, water cold enough to bite my calves. The sobbing swelled into a single phrase, "Where is my child?" Echoes wrapped around me as I reached the spot where I'd seen her. I trained my light on scattered reedy shallows and saw two sets of footprints pressed into mud, one set adult-sized, one child's trailing behind. I swallowed hard, recalling that the mother's search ended when she slipped on slick rocks and sank beneath algae. That history made the footprints impossible. They remained fresh, yet no human had trod here for decades. The sobbing stopped. I spun and stumbled back to shore, heart pounding. The moment both feet struck dry ground, a wail erupted from the lake's center, pitch-black water roiling as a hand shot above the surface, followed by a pale face with empty eye sockets. It cried, "Find my baby," then sank again with a final splash. I staggered backward into my camp, collapsing behind my tent. Through the thin canvas, I heard her footfalls creeping closer until her sobbing echoed inches away, tickled my ear with frosty breath. I bolted from my tent into the darkness, racing through the trees until I emerged on the gravel road. Headlight beams splintered the fog. Securing my tent with a few backward glances, I drove off, the sobs still echoing through my windows. Each time I fill my baby's bathtub, I see that pale hand reaching from the water, crying for a lost child. I packed away my camping gear, but whenever thunder rolls over nighttime skies, I brace for that mother's wail, still searching, still calling out across Lost Woman's Lake. I can't return there. Even now, I hear her whispered plea, "Find my baby," drifting through the dark corners of my mind. Bear Creek Hollow, in northeastern Tennessee, was home to an old Appalachian clan rumored to practice root magic. In 1905, the last clan matriarch vanished into the woods, said to have merged into a ring of hollows and twisted oak trunks. No one who entered since returned. In September 2023, after my mother's terminal diagnosis left me frantic, I visited her family cabin just across from Bear Creek Hollow, and in a haze of grief, I ventured into those woods, seeking any scrap of her strength. I crossed a rickety footbridge at dawn and entered the forest as mist curled around ancient roots. The journal my mother gave me, her grandmother's scrawled notes, warned, "The trees watch. They drain what you hold dear." By mid-morning, I reached a clearing ringed by 5 colossal oaks, each with a perfect hollow about waist high as if carved by an unseen sculptor. Something about their bark looked like woven bone. I stepped closer, and my palms prickled. The hollows were empty, except each contained a small lock of gray hair twisted like a braid. Panic fluttered in my chest. These looked like my mother's silver from chemo. As I pressed a trembling hand to the nearest hollow, a low hum began, nearly imperceptible at first, then swelling into a chorus of voices. My mother's laughter as a child, my own cries of grief, my grandmother's lullabies. The wind stilled. I could only hear their echoes. My throat seized as I realized the tree was siphoning those memories. Behind me, I felt branches slide, like hands brushing my clothes. I whipped around, no one, only shifting shadows. Terrified, I ran to the next hollow and peered inside. It was full of handfuls of spilled earth and brittle rose petals, as though of freshly dug graves. I stumbled to the third tree. Its hollow contained my grandfather's silver pocket watch, stopped at 3:15 p.m., the moment my mother was born. A sudden whisper cracked my eardrum, "Take it back," and I yanked my hand free, nearly toppling. With that act, the humming ceased, replaced by a low groan of wood expanding. Panicked, I sprinted out of the circle. Branches slapped at my face as the howling began, like 1,000 scratchings of dry claws on bark. The trees behind me shifted toward the edges of my vision, as though leaning in for a closer look. I scrambled uphill, heart pounding, until I burst out of the forest and collapsed at the cabin's porch steps. The moment I reached safety, the hollowing ceased, as though the circle of trees had claimed what they wanted and let me leave. I never retrieved my mother's hair or my grandfather's watch. Now, each morning I wake with a strange emptiness, as though a piece of my memory is missing. When I pass old oak groves, I feel their hollow stares, remembering how they nearly stole my mother's life before she ever truly lived. I sold a cabin after her memorial. Every time I hear wind whistling through hollow trunks, I see those pale oak hollows waiting to gather more lost fragments of my heart. Foggy Gap is a low pass in Kentucky's Appalachian foothills, famous for morning mists so dense they swallow entire ridges. In 1927, a basket weaver named Mavis McAllister vanished there while gathering reeds, her loom and half-woven baskets left by a creek. Tales say her spirit still weaves reed traps to ensnare wanderers. In early 2024, after my workshop closed permanently, I decided to hike Foggy Gap at dawn to find her half-finished basket, hoping to salvage some forgotten craft. I parked at the trailhead when a ghostly pall of mist clung to the hollows. By 6 a.m., I reached the creek bank where my mother's journal had marked Mavis's weaving spot, a tangled thicket of reeds bent into knotted loops. Gray mist swirled, muffling my steps. I found the loom's wooden frame submerged halfway in water, reed strips tangled around its warped pegs. Kneeling, I felt my fingertips brush damp reeds as a soft chanting began, rhythmic, like shuttles gliding through warped threads. The mist parted with each chant, revealing a pale figure hunched over the loom, weaving with her fingers ghostly white. I whispered, "Mavis." She paused, head turning slowly. Her eyes were closed, her face serene yet hollow. When she resumed weaving, the reed sheath beneath the loom began to pulse, as though alive. The chanting rose, an echo of her breath caught in her throat, and reed loops snapped into place, weaving a basket of twisted vines and bone. I reached toward the loom. She halted, and in a single motion, the basket leapt free, propelled by invisible currents into my arms. Its weaving was perfect except for a single reed hanging loose, like an unfinished prayer. Blood drained from my face when I peered into the basket. Tiny fish bones and scraps of faded cloth pooled in its base. Mavis's chant turned into a wailing cry as she rose, stepping from the mist toward me, eyes hollow yet focused. I backed away, clutching the basket as though it might vanish if I let go. She lifted an arm, beckoning me to slice the loose reed. My breath caught. I realized she wanted me to complete her final weaving. Fingers trembling, I wove that loose end into the basket's rim. The moment I finished the stitch, her entire shape blurred, and she vanished into the mist, her wailing dissolving into a sigh of release. The basket remains on my mantel, reed pattern flawless, except for the single seam where I finished her work. I can't bring myself to touch it, fearing Mavis's wail might slip back into the world. Now, whenever fog drapes the hills, I hear the soft whisper of chanting reeds, and I remember how a half-woven basket nearly claimed me at Foggy Gap. Some crafts are best left unfinished. In the morning mists, I understand that the spirit who weaves there still waits for one more braid of reed. Claremont Mills in northeastern Tennessee was abandoned after a cotton mill fire in 1915 killed 30 workers. Locals say red smoke still drifts from the ruins on moonless nights, and that phantom factory whistles blow at 3:15 a.m. every July. In summer 2024, grieving my best friend who died in a factory collapse, I decided to camp by those ruins on the mill's anniversary, hoping to witness that red smoke firsthand. I set up my tent near the sandstone remains just before sunset, the smell of honeysuckle drifting through the air. As dusk fell, I heard the faint creak of rusted gears and a single echoing blast of a passing train, though no tracks touched Claremont Mills. At midnight, the temperature plummeted. My flashlight stuttered as red smoke curled along the ground, wisps of ember glow drifting from shattered windows. My breath caught, and I realized the ruins burned without flame. Ash drifted skyward, singing with a faint hiss like molten silk. Creeping closer, I saw ghostly silhouettes stepping free from the smoke, men and women in cotton dust-stained overalls, faces sooty with ash, eyes hollow. Their lips moved in silent commands as they gathered near an overturned loom. One lifted a phantom whip, cracking it against debris as though driving cotton bales through a press. The red smoke thickened, taking shape, my friend's face among them, his features caught in half-baked agony. He reached toward me, mouth open in a silent cry. "Stay?" I reeled back, stumbling over scorched timbers. Behind me, the factory whistle, rusted and half-buried, blew a blast so shrill my eardrums ruptured. When I turned again, the figures were walking toward me in a slow procession, each wreathed in red smoke that clung to their bodies like living flesh. They extended hands, dripping soot and embers. The air crackled as I bolted uphill into the woods, branches snapping underfoot. The whistle followed me, 5 successive blasts, until I tumbled onto the gravel road gasping. When dawn broke, the ruins lay cold, no trace of smoke or silhouettes. My boots, caked in ash and rust, were the only evidence I'd been there. I drove away with my camera full of red-hued blurs, memories of a mill that never truly went silent. Every July 15th, I awake to phantom whistles slicing through the night, my heart pounding, if only for a second. The red smoke never left Claremont Mills. It colors my thoughts whenever I see industrial chimneys on the horizon. I know my friend's spirit still hangs in that ember haze, bound to the mill's unending flames, calling out for another soul to keep in company in the red smoke's glow. When my aunt gave me her late husband's birdwatching journal in fall 2023, I noticed repeated entries about whispers among the pines near Hazel Creek in eastern Tennessee. He claimed these voices guided him toward a vanished blue heron rookery. After losing my job, I felt adrift, so I decided to retrace his steps, binoculars in hand, to listen for truths among those pines. I arrive at the Hazel Creek trailhead just before sunset, treading over fallen maple leaves. By 5:45 p.m., I'd entered a stand of ancient white pines, their needles trembling in an early autumn breeze. I flipped open the journal to the page that read, "Pines speak at dusk, soft as feathers." No sooner had I scanned the words than I heard it, faint murmuring drifting through the trunks, like distant bird calls swirling into half-formed phrases. My pulse quickened. My aunt's husband had called them whispers, but I never believed it. I raised my binoculars to search for blue herons, but instead I caught just the shimmer of movement behind a cluster of trunks. The whispers halted the moment my beam struck the spot, silence settling as if the forest itself held its breath. Still, I pressed on, letting the path curl around a mossy boulder beside the creek. That night, I made camp at the water's edge, listening to the creek's gentle murmur. At 11 p.m., the hush was shattered by soft laughter. Branches overhead rustled, though no wind blew. Heart pounding, I grabbed my headlamp and found a narrow footpath of freshly fallen needles leading uphill. Drawn by the throaty, bird-like tones, "Come closer, stay forever, never leave," I followed until the surrounding gloom thickened. Suddenly, the murmuring crescendoed, then stopped on heartbeat. In that stifling silence, I realized I had wandered into a circle of small pine cones laid in concentric rings around an uprooted sapling, like a ritual boundary. The moment my foot crossed the inner ring, the pines all at once exhaled, a wave of whispered words tumbling around me. I stumbled back, racing downhill, branches snagging my jacket as if the trees themselves reached out. When I thought I'd put enough distance between myself and whatever voice haunted the pines, I heard frantic scratching on my tent's walls. I darted out just before dawn and saw 3 figures, tall, pale as birch bark, standing in formation between the trees. Their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Their eyes glowed like ember coals. They surrounded my camp in absolute stillness, their whispered "come," now a chorus of cackles. My breath caught as their heads tilted in unison. Without thinking, I grabbed my pack and bolted through undergrowth, the whispers chasing me until I burst out at the trailhead. I never managed to spot a heron that trip, but every evening at home, I catch myself straining to hear soft voices in wind chimes, pine murmurs echoing across miles. I burned the journal pages referencing whispers, hoping to sever whatever bond my aunt's husband forged with those trees. Still, on foggy nights, I half expect to hear those pine voices beckoning me back into the Hazel Creek woods, where they once drew me closer with their singing boughs. Widow's Bend is a meander on the Tennessee River near Chattanooga. A lone sycamore there turns an unsettling red each autumn, said to bleed from an 1874 massacre of a riverboat crew. Locals warn, anyone who sets foot under its branches at night will bleed their impurities. In October 2023, racked by guilt over a hit and run, I ventured to the bend at dusk, hoping to atone beneath the red tree's crimson boughs. I arrived at the riverbank as the amber sun dipped below the bluff. Mist hung low over the water. The red tree stood alone on a narrow spit of land, its leaves the color of fresh blood. Hesitantly, I stepped under its canopy. Almost immediately, I felt a damp spray on my neck, like flicking droplets of red paint. Looking up, I saw dark, sticky foam dripping from gnarled branches, sap-tinted, vivid scarlet. My breath caught as I recalled the local lore. He who bleeds at Widow's Bend must pay his dues. I built a small fire in the sand, torching an old cross-etched plinth I found nearby, hoping to burn away any curse. As darkness deepened, I dozed fitfully until midnight. Then came footsteps on the sand, soft, splashing steps tracking waist-deep along the river's edge. I grabbed my headlamp. The beam revealed 6 figures emerging from the water, shackled riverboat crew, their sleeves torn, flesh-stained crimson. One hoisted a bent lantern with a bleeding glass lens that pulsed like a malignant heart. They advanced in perfect silence toward my fire. I froze as the lead man lifted his head, his face cracked into a broken grin. "Your dead is our blood," he whispered. In that moment, every muscle seized with fear. I threw sand into the fire, and they vanished beneath the waves, leaving 6 floating lanterns that bobbed momentarily, then flickered out. Shaken, I fled into the woods behind the riverbank, branches clawing at my skin. By dawn, I crawled back to the red tree. Beneath its roots lay dozens of red sap acorns, each oozing bright scarlet like blood drops. I picked one up. It rolled heavy in my palm, as though weighed by guilt. My shirt was soaked in fresh stains, though I had no cuts. I retched, realizing the blood came from the tree itself, purged from its heart. Terrified, I dropped the acorn and limped away. Then came a memory. The fearful men had vanished into the river because I'd built my fire too close, disturbing their rest. I drove off without looking back, haunted by the knowledge that Widow's Bend still bleeds for those who trespass. Weeks later, I still feel phantom droplets on my face when passing a window at night. I donated money anonymously to car crash victims, but I can't shake the image of those hollow eyes pleading for atonement. Now whenever I hear a riverboat whistle at dusk, I cross myself and pray I never return to Widow's Bend, where the red tree bleeds for us all. Catawba Falls, near Brevard, North Carolina, is celebrated for its cascading waterfalls. Yet locals speak of a secret swimming hole, Choir's Pool, where in 1903, a visiting gospel choir drowned when the rocks collapsed beneath them. In June 2024, after my fiancé ended our engagement, I felt adrift. I resolved to find that hidden pool, hoping nature's beauty might soothe my heart. I hiked past the first falls as daylight waned, following an overgrown spur marked on an old map. By 7:30 p.m., I found the nearly invisible trail veer northeast, bordered by moss-covered slabs etched with carved initials and dates from 1903. Following those markers led me downhill to a pile of smooth river cobbles arranged in a semicircle, like natural pew stones facing an altar. No water was visible. I dropped my pack, remembering the date scrawled in chalk on one boulder. June 12, 1903, choir perished here. At 9 p.m., I heard rushing water, a narrow chute spilling into a dark basin. Moonlight glinted off ripples in choir's pool. Wading in, the water numbed my legs. I felt something brush my calf cold, feather-light, like a fingertip. I spun, but saw only my reflection warped by moon ripples. Then a faint, harmonic hum rose from the chasm, the choir's hymn echoing underwater. My heart pounded. Through my peripheral vision, I glimpsed 6 pale faces forming in the pool, eyes closed, mouths open, singing a wordless lament. Stumbling back onto slick rocks, I began my climb back to the semicircle of stones. As I neared the river's edge again, flickering lights strobed between foliage. 6 figures in white robes, each holding an antique brass lantern. They stepped from the shadows in solemn procession, faces featureless, but posture rigid as corpse wood. They marched in perfect silence toward the basin's rim. I pressed back against a granite boulder, bracing as they reached the water's edge. Then, in unison, they set their lanterns upon the surface and waded into the pool, heads bowed. The moonlight caught the lantern's glow on crests of water, and the choir's lament swelled, 6 voices layering into a bone-shaking chord. Their wails echoed against moss-clad cliffs. The lanterns drifted to center stage, flickering white-hot before extinguishing simultaneously. I couldn't move for fear that a single step would summon them. Finally, I bolted uphill, scrambling over roots and ribs of stone until I burst out onto the trailhead. I didn't stop until I reached my car, lungs heaving. I left my camera gear behind, managing only one shaky photo of ghostly lanterns on the pool. Local hikers say that choir's pool vanishes some nights, leaving only boulders. I haven't been back, though occasionally I find a stray river cobble on my windowsill, smooth as glass. If I hold it to my ear, I swear I can still hear a distant lullaby, a choir I cannot see, calling for one final hymn. My grandmother always forbade me to camp near Singing Hollow in northeastern Tennessee. It was said that on still nights, you'd hear ghostly lullabies sung by lost settlers. This June 2024, after my first major surgery left me shaken, I decided to face my fear and camp there alone. I arrived at dusk as fireflies danced in the pines. By 10 p.m., I pitched my tent beside Piney Creek's gentle rush. The air held a hush thicker than normal. Around midnight, a faint melody drifted through the trees, an old Appalachian lullaby I'd heard my grandmother hum. Curious, I slipped on boots and followed the sound uphill. It led me to a shallow basin ringed by ancient oak trees whose knotted roots jutted like fingers. There, 6 translucent figures in tattered clothing crouched around a cradle carved from hollow log. They rocked it in silence, their faces tilted upward as they sang in perfect harmony. "Sleep, child, sleep." As I lifted my headlamp, they vanished. Yet the lullaby continued, now encircling me from all directions. My flashlight beam landed on the cradle. Inside lay a bundle of ragged cloth, but no baby. When I reached in, I found a brittle wooden doll hand bound with tangled yarn. A crackle of static, followed by a soft coo, filled the air. I spun to find a pale, wide-eyed woman standing behind me, staring with empty sockets. I stumbled backward into the hollow, and the lullaby crescendoed into a wail that shook my bones. I bolted down the trail in terrified strides, the song echoing until I tripped on a root and tumbled to the creek's edge. Every step splashed me colder, and the wail receded as I reached my campsite. I fled at first light, leaving the doll in the hollow. Now, whenever I hear a child's cry in the distance, I wonder if that cradle still rocks, and if the ghosts search for someone to lull into their final rest. In southwestern Virginia, Black Mountain's hiking route is marked by red blazes. But locals warn that on foggy mornings, a phantom set of blazes appears, guiding hikers off the cliffs into Death's Ledge. After losing my compass in a snowstorm, I resolved to test that legend in March 2024, thinking my GPS would keep me safe. Dawn's gray light revealed frost-laced rhododendron as I followed the official red blazes uphill. By mid-morning, thick fog rolled in, swallowing every ridge. My GPS flickered. No signal. I noticed a second set of red marks painted haphazardly below the blaze I'd passed earlier. Against my better judgment, I followed them. They led off the beaten path down a narrow slope, so steep I nearly slipped multiple times. The second blazes glowed brighter as I descended, and I heard my name whispered by the wind. Jonah, Jonah. I swallowed hard. The trail ended at a sheer rock face above a yawning chasm. When I shone my headlamp down, I saw dozens of red handprints smeared on the lip of the ledge. Footsteps behind me snapped my head around, revealing a hunched form clothed in mud-stained wool. Its face was featureless, replaced by a crimson-smudged crown. It lifted a hand and pointed into the fog. Panic surged. I scrambled backward up the slope, but the blaze marks receded as if washing away in mist. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, now a chorus of frantic voices tugging at my clothes. I scrambled to rejoin the official trail, heart pounding. When I finally burst into sunlight on a higher ridge, the fog thinned, and I saw the normal red blaze ahead. The phantom path had vanished. Only fresh red sap dripped from the rhododendron bark where those false blazes once glowed. I returned to my car shaking, no faint memory of how I climbed back. Now, whenever fog drifts on Black Mountain, I remember those crimson handprints and whispering voices. I still carry a small compass, but I know the red blaze can mislead even the most prepared. Grayson's River, running through North Carolina's rolling foothills, is named for a ferryman who vanished in 1802. They say his lantern still appears on moonless nights, drifting on the current, calling for passengers. In July 2024, after my father's funeral, I paddled solo in a kayak at dusk, hoping to see this legend and prove it's just a story. I launched my kayak under heavy clouds, only the slather of water against wood and my own breath. By 10 p.m., the river was glassy, reflecting pinprick stars. The air turned cold, mist rose in ghostly filaments. Up ahead, a flicker of orange light bobbed on the current, too steady to be a firefly. My heart thudded as I paddled closer. The light resolved into an old tin lantern hanging from a wooden yoke strapped to driftwood. It swung rhythmically, flame flickering wild emerald green. I called out, "Hello." The lantern swung toward me, revealing a narrow skiff half submerged, no ferryman visible. I reached to touch the lantern. Instantly, the flame flared bright red and a rasping voice whispered, "Board." I recoiled, dropping my paddle. The skiff lurched upright, though no current touched it. A figure in weathered buckskins rose, a silhouette void of features, with lantern's light flickering in his empty eye sockets. I seized my paddle and spun the kayak around, but a chill wind whipped the water, pushing me toward the skiff as red mist curled over the river. The ferryman's whispered plea turned into a groaning chant, "Ride with me." My kayak's bow scraped stone as I clambered ashore, barely escaping the skiff's grasp. When I turned back, the ferryman and his lantern vanished into the fog, though distant creaks suggested unseen oars cutting waves. Now each time I sleep by a riverbank, I wake to a soft green glow on the water and a rasping voice calling my name. I sold my kayak, but some nights I still hear those phantom oars skimming the current, reckoning debts between the living and the drowned. Widow's Knob, an isolated hilltop in eastern Kentucky, was where a young bride vanished on her wedding day in 1920. Hikers say her veil still drifts across the summit, and they hear her sobbing echo in the wind. This August 2024, after my fiancé broke up with me, I climbed to Widow's Knob at dawn, hoping to find solace in maybe that lost bride's peace. I hiked through dew-soaked ferns as sunrise painted the sky amber. By 7 a.m., only a thin haze obscured the view. Reaching the summit, I found a single white wedding veil draped over a fallen oak limb, fluttering in a breeze that wasn't there. My heartbeat tightened. I draped the veil over my shoulders. A chill ran through me as the wind died. The veil's lace rippled, forming words on its hem. Come home. That single phrase glowed faintly in morning light. Startled, I backed away as the hills around me erupted with sobbing, low hollow, echoing from the bluff's rocky face. I turned back to find the veil lifted skyward, suspending itself as though held by phantom hands. A woman in a soiled wedding gown emerged from the mist, face streaked with tears, eyes empty abysses. She extended one pale arm and whispered, "Forgive me." I tried to speak, but no sound came. Her cry grew into a howl that shattered my eardrums. Branches snapped behind me. I spun to see dozens of long-dead brides in tattered gowns advancing down the slope, mouths gaping, eyes vacant. My legs pumped until I tumbled onto the trail's lowest switchback, dizzy and breathless. When I dared to glance back, the summit was empty except for the floating veil drifting uphill, ghostly as a specter. I left Widow's Knob before noon, leaving the veil where I found it. Now, deciding on whether to propose or walk away forever, I feel her sorrow in every wedding march I hear. Some debts of the heart take more than one lifetime to settle. On that hilltop, her wedding day never ended, and the hollow echo of her promise still calls to lonely souls. Roan Mountain, straddling Tennessee and North Carolina, has a legend of feral people living in back hollows, outsiders who shun the world and devour trespassers. In April 2024, curious to prove its myth, I backpacked alone along the Appalachian Trail section near Black Dyke, hoping to debunk local gossip. I began just past sunrise, the ridge dusted in spring snow. By late afternoon, I camped near an overgrown spur trail leading into thick rhododendron tangles. After dinner, I heated water for tea and heard a distant howl, half human, half beast, wedged between rocks. My pulse jumped. I peered toward the sound, the last rays of sun dying. A shape emerged just beyond the tree line, hunched, fur-caked limbs bent at odd angles. Its mouth split in a ragged grin as it lumbered toward me. I grabbed my pack and retreated into my tent, shivering. At 2 a.m., I awoke to scratching at my tent's door, like fingernails trying to tear canvas. Flashlight in hand, I unzipped and scanned a clearing. 3 figures in matted hides, faces flattened masks of bone, staring at me with glistening eyes. They crept closer, guttural growls building. I slammed the tent and thrust logs onto my small fire, its glow flickering over my canvas. Through the thin material, I felt their eyes watching me, their breath hot against the nylon. As dawn broke, I forced myself to pack and march uphill, boots squelching in thawing mud. I paused at a junction and saw arrow-etched signs on trees, "Stay out," and "They're watching." The skin on my neck prickled as I glimpsed a figure's silhouette 100 yards down the ridge, watching. I sprinted to the nearest shelter at Carver's Gap and didn't stop until I reached a ranger station. I was told no one's lived off trail for decades. Yet I still feel eyes on me, whenever I hike rocky hollows or camp near dense laurel. Feral people may be myth, but I hear their howls in the wind, and I know some tracks in the mud can't be swatted away by sunrise. Smoky's Peak in North Carolina's Smoky Mountains is named for the ever-lingering haze. Legend says that when a forest fire kills too many souls, red smoke ghosts rise from the summit, sending a warning far below. In August 2024, after my sister's funeral, I hiked to that peak at dusk, hoping to witness the smoke and find closure. I climbed under heavy clouds, the trail slick with recent rain. By 9 p.m., I neared the summit, where an abandoned ranger cabin stood half-collapsed. My headlamp caught a trail of red ash along the roofline. I stepped inside, finding a rusted can of gasoline and a charred rag, evidence of someone's frantic attempt to stave off a fire. On the cabin's wooden table lay an ash-dusty journal. The last entry read, "Red smoke guides the lost." A low rumble shook the cabin as I climbed out onto the ridge. Suddenly, a column of red smoke sprang from a knot in the ground. No flame visible, just blood-red fumes climbing into the night sky. The mist parted to reveal ghostly silhouettes of firefighters in turn-of-the-century gear, faces blackened, wielding axes that glowed ember red. They marched past me in perfect formation, heading to the edge of the ridge, where I saw flickers of flame crawling along the distant treetops. Their chant began as a rumble, building into a guttural wail. I barely breathed as sparks crackled across the hillside. The phantoms raised torches that ignited the red smoke into conflagrations of phantom flame. Yet no real heat reached me. Their eyes locked onto mine. I sensed they demanded I carry that warning to those below. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots until I hit my knees at the cabin door. When I scrambled inside, the smoke vanished, but the cabin filled with the scent of scorched pine. I fled down the trail, the distant wail and crackle echoing until I reached a ranger's post at first light. Now, whenever I see wildfire smoke on the horizon, I'm haunted by those phantom firefighters marching through red mist. I feel an obligation to warn others when the haze turns crimson, and to believe that sometimes the mountains themselves rise to sound an alarm for the living. Swannanoa Gap, the pass between Asheville and Black Mountain, North Carolina, has a reputation. Train whistles at night when no train runs. Legend says it's the spirits of workers killed in a 1946 rail collapse. In December 2024, after losing my contract at a magazine, I took a late drive through the gap, hoping the whistle was just mechanical failure. I steered my car into Swannanoa Gap at 11 p.m., the temperature hovering below freezing. My radio crackled but stayed silent. By midnight, mountain winds rattled the windshield. Then, far off, I heard a mournful whistle. I glanced down the valley, no tracks in sight. The whistle grew louder, closer, reflecting from rocky cliffs as though a phantom train barreled through. My headlights picked out an old rail abandoned years ago. Compelled, I parked and walked onto the icy ties. The whistle wound into a dirge of clangs and rattles. My breath frosted in the air as I pressed forward. Suddenly, a spectral locomotive roared into view. No cars, only the engineless frame of steel and steam. Pale ghosts in work clothes spilled from the cab, their faces gaunt, eyes hollow. Each held a lantern that flickered green. They turned as one and began to whistle in unison, a broken train call that rattled my soul. My heart seized as they marched down the ties toward me. The climbing whistle grew deafening. I fled to the roadside, skidding on ice, as the spectral train dissipated into swirling mist. Behind me, the whistle lingered, fading only when I reached my car. As I drove off, the whistle blew one final time, a high keening note echoing beyond any mortal train's reach. Now, every time I cross Swananoa Gap, I brace for that whistle, still carried on cold wind. The spirits of workers lost in steel still mourn, their train running without end. I've long since sold that car. I prefer moonless nights by a wood stove than driving through any gap where the dead might whistle my name.